Hello and welcome to the 12 Months to Marathon podcast with me, John Hill, the running podcast for the over 35s with marathon dreams. Episode 28, The Resentful Runner. I've called that for a specific reason, which links into marathon training, which I'll come on to in a second. Speaking of which, what's going on with me at the moment? Well, I'm halfway through my marathon training nearly as I record this, week 8. This week's an adaptation week or a deload week, which is a lighter week. So you're still doing quite a few miles and some pace work, but you're not doing the volume of mileage that you're going to do over the next few weeks. Now, when you're going into your meaty part of your marathon training, which usually is probably week 8, week 8 up until week 14, basically. So the 6-week period there, where you're halfway through going into tapering at the end, is where it gets a little bit tasty. So you need a couple of deload weeks in there to make sure that your body's recovering and you're allowing yourself to deal with what comes ahead. So it's been a good week so far. Speed work's going well. Did a couple of tempo runs over distance, which tested my body out, and I'm okay with that at the moment. Obviously, we can always do better. We can eat better. We can sleep better. We can do all of that. But basically, yeah, it's going as well as it can at the moment, and I'm feeling quite good with the whole thing. So, yeah, onward we march with marathon training. And on that note, I want to talk about something that I've posted about on Instagram, 12 Months to Marathon. Make sure you follow me over there. And it captivated a bit of interest, and I love running. And I think anybody that understands running properly, in my opinion, understands that there'll be a time when you hate running, even though you love it. And that's why I've called this the Resentful Runner, because a lot of people that listen to me and follow me, and I appreciate it, thank you very much, are marathon runners. And a lot of people actually are first-time marathon runners. So actually, funny enough, I was looking in my running community the other day, and I think something like 80% of the people in there are running their first marathon. So we're dealing with a lot of first-time marathon runners, and my job here, or what I feel is my purpose here, is to give people the truth about marathon running, and particularly marathon training, and the fact that it's not all sweetness and light, it's not all rainbows, it's discipline, it's organisation, it's saying no to things, it's pushing yourself beyond limits, it's doing the opposite of what most people do, if we're honest, when it comes to fitness. Because as I record this, Tuesday just gone as I record this, it's Friday as I record this, was National Quitting Day, or Quitting Day according to Strava's data. And the data that they've collected tells them that the majority of people on their system quit on the second Tuesday of January. Now that's no time at all, really. We're just over halfway through the month, so that sort of tells you where people are at with the new year health and fitness thing. So when you're marathon training, you've got to go completely against all of that and act totally differently. You've got to be committed to it. There's no taking it or leaving it. There's no getting round to it. There's no doing when it's convenient. You've got to do it, and it's a marathon. And that would be a totally different approach if we were just dealing with the general fitness thing, because then, like I said last week, you've got to be a bit more soft. So my job here, just to clarify again, is to make sure that you're fully ready to know what you're up against, and particularly know what you're up against in respect of the training. Okay. So the reason why I've called this a resentful runner is because I put a post up the other day that says, if you are marathon training properly, there will come to a point in your process or your cycle or your training plan where you dislike running a little bit, and you actually resent it a little bit. You actually resent going out a little bit. And I will always stand by that, because I've been there a few times over the last couple of weeks, particularly last week when the mileage was quite heavy for me. I was up to 60 miles last week with speed work, with my first 20-mile run. Here in the UK, it was icy, it was cold. The cold's not a problem for me, running in the cold. I'd much rather, anybody who prefers running in the heat of running in the cold, for me, is an interesting individual, and let's just say we'll agree to disagree on that one. But for me, running in the cold's fine, but it's the ice, and you don't want to risk injury. And it was particularly in this country, because of the moisture, because it's wet, you do get that sort of black ice type of effect, so it can be quite treacherous out there. So doing a 60-mile week, including a 20-mile run, and my speed work, which I had to do some on the treadmill as well, I was really, really pleased with. But there was times last week when things were busy. And one of the things I noticed from my run this week was my 10-mile tempo run, was that I perhaps need to do a bit more strength conditioning on my legs to make sure my legs are strong. Because, I need to make sure that I make the time to do that, irrespective about what's going on, because it's very important. So, but I had that moment last week. And what you've got to remember is that you are doing something that requires a level of thinking that goes beyond general fitnessy stuff. Now, a lot of the reasons why, this is probably a podcast on its own, but a lot of the reasons why a good half marathon runner struggles to then replicate that over marathon distance is because there's a big difference between running fast, running distance and running fast over distance. They're different mindsets. And one of the things that I've noticed, particularly when I made the transition, was the time that's involved in the training. And that's where the resentment comes in, potentially. But here's the thing. I want to let you know today that it's okay to feel that way, okay? So it's okay to feel that way. Because despite what we think, if you resent running a little bit during the process of marathon training, I think you're doing it right, because that means you're doing the required amount of miles. Because what happens is not every single run that you're going to do is fun. Not every single run that you do you're going to feel like doing, both physically and mentally. And unless you're injured, which a lot of times people aren't, and unless you are absolutely physically exhausted, which, trust me, you have to push yourself quite hard to get to that point. You have to go out and the runs that when you don't want to do it, or when you hate running a little bit or resent running a little bit, are the ones that matter. Now, if you go back and listen to the myth of motivation, and again, a lot of these subjects we're going to regurgitate because it's an ongoing process, yeah? People get far too caught, this is my thing, people get far too caught up with the technical aspects of running. They want the science, they want the technique, they want all this. Most people are recreational runners. They're not athletes, so you don't need to worry about any of that. You don't need to worry about 4-inch soles. And he said 4-inch heels, and if you're running in 4-inch heels, fair play to you. No, running in 4-inch soles, you don't need to worry about your heart rate. You don't need to worry about any of that first. You need to worry about whether or not you've got the correct mindset and you've got the correct attitude and paradigm to approach running, okay? So the first thing you need to remember is that there are going to be times when you don't want to do this, and you've still got to go. And when it's in marathon training, that is amplified tenfold. So let's be honest, most of us, when it comes to fitness, just general running, just recreational stuff, not training for anything, sometimes it's hard to get out, right? We all know that, especially in the winter. But when you're marathon training, there's almost like this sword of Damocles that says you have to go out, because if you don't, every run you miss is going to make that race day even more painful. Okay, running a marathon is incredible, particularly a big marathon, doing one of the big marathons, the iconic ones, the t-shirt, the medal, the whole thing, incredible experience. And what you don't want to do is ruin that experience by not training properly, because there are going to be times during the race, especially if it's your first one, when you seriously question yourself mentally, yeah? If you're not physically ready, that's just a lesson, and then you can work on that in the future. But if mentally, there are going to be times when you question yourself a lot, question whether you can do this, question whether it's working, looking around, seeing other people perhaps struggling or whatever it might be. And it's easy to get inside our own heads. So what you need to do is build the right level of resistance to that, resilience as well, to make sure that you've got the courage and bravery to overcome your mental state. Because it's usually a mental problem, it's not a physical one. You convince yourself that there's a problem when there isn't. So when you go out and run, when you don't want to, when you resent it a little bit, when you hate it a little bit, I'll be honest, you conquer those fears. So for example, with me yesterday, I pushed myself, but I was comfortable. Now I stopped at 10 miles yesterday when I was doing that tempo run. I could have done 13, I could have gone to half marathon, but I convinced myself that, I've got a few niggles, I might stop. But that was a mental decision, it wasn't a physical one. I could have kept going, basically, and that was a good example for me. Now, I performed quite well, and I'm not crying into my coffee because I still ran 14 miles and 10 of that was tempo, so I'm certainly not crying in my coffee. But it showed how powerful your mental state is, and I think getting over this hump of resenting runs, hating runs, dreading your training plan is just normal, because I could sit here and try and be all motivational and try and pump you up and go, you can do it, you can do it. But I think you've got to overcome this part of it, and I think this part of it is very, very important, and I don't think it can be underestimated or ignored. So if you are in a marathon training cycle and you're a couple of weeks in at the moment, and you're potentially already starting to resent the fact that you're having to be more organised, more disciplined and all these things to get these runs in whenever you've got to get them in, particularly if you've got a situation similar to myself with a family, that's good. It means you're training properly. And I promise you, when you overcome these barriers, what you're doing is you're defeating the little negative voice inside your head, because the little voice inside your head, number one, isn't you. And number two, it's naturally designed to be negative because it's trying to keep you safe. There are various explanations for this, psychological explanations for this and all this, but simple for me, as simple as it gets, it's trying to keep you safe because it doesn't want you to go outside of this safety place where you're at, yeah? And to be a marathon runner, you're going to have to make yourself uncomfortable and do things that you never thought you could, which for a lot of people is going out when you really don't want to. And I'm an honest person based on the marathons that I've done. You know, I'm not a young kid. I didn't start doing marathons until I was in my mid-30s. So it wasn't like it was a breeze for me. It's always been hard. It's been challenging. You know, it's difficult at the moment with the timing point of view and getting everything done. But I know how rewarding it can be. And I know how rewarding it is to get over those difficult runs, because what you do is you build resources. And you always build those resources of, I didn't want to go out today and I did. Bang, tick the box. Mentally tick that box to say, I now have a resource. I now have something I can use when times get tough, because times will get tough. Because I know that when I'm talking on this podcast, I'm not talking to athletes. I'm not talking to people doing 2:45 marathons. They've already done this. They're pushing to a new level. They've still got this challenge, but they're pushing to a new level. If it's your first marathon and you don't know what to expect and it's the unknown, I'm here to get you ready for it. I'm here to tell you can do it. 100% I believe in you if you follow your plan. But if you don't follow your plan, no amount of believing in yourself will make a difference, because you're not going to be physically ready. And to follow your plan, you've got to overcome those mental challenges of, I really don't want to do this today, but I've got to go and do it. Yeah. And you've really got to learn the difference between what physical exhaustion is and just being a little bit tired and you don't want to do it. You should be tired during marathon training. And the problem is you can't rest and recover your way to 26.2 miles. Rest and recovery is important and it's part of the process, and you will have to pay attention to that. But you can't rest and recover your way to a marathon. You've got to run a marathon, and you've got to train like you're going to run a marathon if you want to run the whole thing. If you're setting up for a run walk, no problem at all, that's fine. But if you want to run it, then you've got to build up the necessary miles on your legs and also build up the resilience in your mental state to be able to take on the training. Okay, so you will resent running a little bit, hopefully. If you don't, brilliant, but I'm sure you probably will at some point. You probably will hate it, and you probably throw your toys out the pram and not want to do it. But that's I'm here to tell you that's normal, and it's part of the process, and there's nothing wrong with you. And it doesn't, because I get this, I totally understand. Quite a few people say, oh, I love running, and I love running. I'm not talking about loving running. I'm talking about following a structured process that you have to follow. And if you don't follow it, you're going to get found out quite severely and that goes for anything, by the way. Here I'm talking marathons, but this could be half marathon training plan. It's training for anything. You've got to go and do that work, otherwise on the day you are going to get found out. So just to wrap up, because I want to keep again these nice and punchy, it's perfectly normal during a marathon training cycle to perhaps sometimes hate running a little bit and resent running a little bit, and that means for me you're doing it properly, so give yourself a pat on the back for doing it properly. If you haven't done any runs and you're resenting running, what you've got to do then is go back to square one and look at the reason why you're doing the marathon in the first place. Because if that's not enough motivation to get you out, you've got to look at you've got to look at why you're doing that run in the first place. But again, that's probably a podcast for another day about motivations and stuff. So today I wanted to let you know quite early, for a lot of you, if you are in the process, that it is perfectly normal occasionally to hate running during the marathon training cycle and resent it a little bit, and that's perfectly normal. And you can still love running and sometimes hate a training plan, because it means you're doing it right. So there you go, the resentful runner. So thank you very much for listening. As always, I do appreciate it. Hop over to Instagram, 12 Months to Marathon. Drop me a follow over there. If you're looking for any support or coaching, you can message me over at 12 Months to Marathon. The best thing to do is either drop me a comment with 12 or message 12, and we can send you our free coaching video where it outlines how we help people go from 0 to 12 to marathon in 12 months or less, or just help you run a first marathon with structured coaching and support. If we have a chat and it's not for you, that's fine, but feel free to ask the question. No harm done. Don't forget to like and share this podcast wherever you get your podcast from. I do appreciate that. Drop a rating on it as well and share it with your friends. That's also appreciated. So yeah, if you need any support or you want to get your free daily running tips, don't forget 12 Months to Marathon on Instagram. Thank you very much for listening. As always, I appreciate it. Best of British with the rest of your training, and I'll speak to you all very soon indeed.